Hey people. I want to speak today about a subject that is really important for me because I've had a very unpleasant personal experience connected with it, albeit a long time ago, but one that really did influence my life and my thinking on this subject. The issue is about crime, specifically antisocial behaviour. Crime covers a very wide range of things, obviously slightly different in different countries as well, where there's different legislation, but crime covers a wide range of things. What I'm talking about is a specific type of crime, and that is the sort of antisocial behaviour that really destroys people's life quality. In the UK, this is a very big problem. Now, we don't have the sort of gun problems, for example, that the United States does, thank goodness. However, we do have problems in other areas, and that is notably in antisocial behaviour. Just to give you a few examples of the sort of things I'm talking about gangs of predominantly young people, sometimes older, but predominantly young people, on street corners, drinking heavily, insulting passers-by, demanding cash or anything from passers-by. Sometimes it's just verbal insults, which I still think isn't good, but occasionally it does turn into outright assault if they don't get their own way. It's basically having an utter disregard for anybody else, having very loud verbal arguments among themselves without giving a damn what anyone else thinks, vandalising property, intimidating people who are different, whether that be from a racial perspective, for example, racist attacks, or maybe a new family that has moved into the neighbourhood. It could be anything, but it covers quite a wide range of things. But basically, it's so-called petty crime that is anything but. I don't like the term petty crime because I think it misleads people into thinking that sort of crime doesn't have an impact on people's lives. That differentiates from things like murder, rape, arson, things which would generally be considered very serious crimes. So-called petty crime, if you experience enough of it, that can destroy your life. If it means that every single day you are having to deal with it, if it means that every single day your business or your property is being targeted by these lowlifes. And I don't believe in using politically correct language around it. I have strong views on these people, and I don't believe in using politically correct language about them. As far as I'm concerned, they're scumbags. So that's just my candid thought on the matter. Even the police are now taking a sort of approach of, oh well, they're fragile young people, this sort of thing. I think it's wrong because the police should be on the side of the public. And unfortunately, I've made this point in another video, it's becoming a bit of a triangle. Police, public, criminals. That's unacceptable. It should be the police and the public on the same side. Which is why when the police abuse their power with people who they really are not a big threat, and then seemingly, I wouldn't say turn a blind eye to crime, I think that's wrong, because police officers often do face dangers, and I don't want to trivialise the pressures of their job. But there needs to be a situation where the public and the police work together on this. And there's a few things I want to go into. The title of this video is Why I Believe in Zero Tolerance. Now basically what zero tolerance means is if someone terrorises society in that sort of way, there should be no sympathy. There shouldn't be a case of, oh well, you have all these excuses, you're nothing to do, you're from a troubled family, etc., and therefore it's okay, we're going to let you away with it this time, give you a tap on the wrist. By zero tolerance, I'm talking about, for example, mandatory custodial sentences for people who violently intimidate others. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. Mandatory prison terms for anyone carrying a knife, things like that. That's what I mean by zero tolerance. The critics of zero tolerance say it's just a quick fix, it doesn't solve anything. But what I would contend is that community sentencing, whilst it has its place, there are many young offenders who basically laugh at community sentences. Literally. They don't take them seriously because they know that community sentences, they can just go out and continue doing what they're doing. You have people who in some cases have committed dozens of crimes in their life. Dozens. hundreds in some cases. So they literally laugh at the idea of a community sentence. These are people who laugh at the system because the system is far too lenient. And I believe in those circumstances the only answer is a custodial sentence. Now, people on the liberal side of this argument, on the predominantly left-wing side, say, oh, prison's not the answer, prison is a school for criminals. And there is some valid arguments in that. Prison is not a perfect situation. I do believe in penal reforms. Where I disagree is the idea that prison in itself is a bad thing. Is the idea that people who terrorise society shouldn't face prison. I disagree with that. I think they should. The problem is not prison itself as an idea. The problem is how efficient prison is. And obviously there does need to be serious reforms. Now, I'm not one of these people who believe that it should be a hellhole and they should be breaking rocks all day, something like that. I believe prison should be humane, because I don't believe society should reduce itself to the level of the offender. Having said that, I don't want to see Scandinavian style prisons, which are basically little better than holiday camps. I want prisons to be tough, because people who voluntarily and knowingly terrorise society should not be treated on the same basis as people who are law-abiding. And people who say, well, you're not looking at the background issues why they're doing this, that's not true. I understand that there are complex issues why people do the things they do. And that's why I believe this should go in tandem with extra resources into looking at the background causes. So for example, if you have a young offender who's grown up in a home where, let's say, the mother's a heroin addict, the father is a perpetual thief, something like that, obviously that child is not going to grow up in a good environment, and there's a very strong chance they'll end up just like their parents. In those circumstances there needs to be a very, very hard line against abusive parents, because parents who are habitual criminals are very likely to be abusive parents, in my opinion. So there needs to be serious consequences for criminals who have children. And there's a controversial issue around separating children from the parents, but the reality is, in some cases, that is the lesser of two evils. It's never a good thing, but in some circumstances I honestly believe, what would you rather have? A young person adopted by a family who is going to bring them up in a much better environment, but they aren't their natural parents, or a family who have an absolute contempt for society, who terrorise society, who don't care what their child gets up to, etc., etc., etc. So in that sense it is a lesser of two evils. I appreciate it's a controversial thing, but I honestly believe that is the lesser of two evils. Because if you have a child growing up in an environment of criminals who have contempt for society, then that is not going to help them one bit. And not only is it an abusive childhood, and very likely they're at the receiving end of a fist every night, but very likely they'll grow up just being like their parents. In an adoptive home, it's not an easy situation, but I do believe that it's preferable. So I really have no problem with that, if it means that that child is going to have a better life. Of course they might resent it at first, but in the long run, I don't want to pretend that I know all the details about this situation. I'm speaking about what I see on the surface. I appreciate these aren't black and white issues, but I just don't believe that when we talk about tackling the root causes, I think tough choices also have to be made regards to that. One problem I have with the liberal argument about this is liberals will blame everybody but the criminal themselves, but the offender themselves. And let's not gloss it over. If someone commits a crime, they are a criminal. They are an offender. Let's just say, not just put it as young people who are bored. That is politically correct language to take away responsibility for them. If you commit an offence, you're an offender. That's just the way it is. And I think one big problem here is that too often we have went down a path of, and I believe this is, with all due respect to social workers, I believe they have led this path of putting responsibility on everybody but the person themselves. In other words, if a gang smashes up a telephone box, or if they threaten someone walking past to give them money, then too often the liberal argument is, oh well, they're bored, they've got nothing to do. I don't accept that for a second, because that is then going into the line of thinking whereby in order for them not to commit crime you have to bend to their demands. Now, if something like that is an issue, if the area, for example, has a lot of public services that are closed down and so on, and there is a shortage of youth clubs, that sort of thing, that is obviously a problem. And the government does have to take responsibility, especially this government, for the number of public services they have cut. But where I cannot accept the left-wing argument is they just want to blame the government, and they want to take away responsibility from the people who are actually committing the crimes. And I think that's unacceptable. As far as I'm concerned, anyone over the age of 16 who commits a crime is entirely responsible for their actions. Someone below that age, you may argue a child, if they've been brought up in a certain circumstance, may not know right from wrong. In those circumstances, they must go through a compulsory education course to know why they are doing what they are doing is wrong. And the parents should be forced to accept that course, and if they don't, then threaten them with taking the child away. This may sound draconian, but what I'm thinking of is the wider issue. The right for the public to be secure. The right for the public not to live in fear. Because up and down this country, there are law-abiding citizens, decent people, who are literally living in fear of leaving their own homes. That's an abomination. That is an utter abomination. And it's actually, I would go as far as to say, it is a human rights issue. That people cannot live freely in their own country, in their own neighbourhood, without having to fear some thug threatening them. That is unacceptable. It shouldn't be a case that criminals are laughing at the law. It should be a case that criminals are frightened of the law. And like I said, I'm really not of the hang him and flog him brigade, i.e. the sort of punishment only logic. I don't believe in that. I believe, for example, in penal reform there should be resources put into things like education. I do draw a line with giving inmates some of the things that people outside the penal system get, i.e. law-abiding citizens. So I do think there should be some sacrifices that inmates can't get that law-abiding members of the public do. But I don't believe they should be breaking rocks all day either. I think there should be some practical resources in prison. So it's not a black and white issue, but I do really have no patience for those who always want to take away responsibility from offenders. Because in the end of the day, if you have, as I have, been terrorised by these people day in and day out, believe me, it saps away all sympathy. In most circumstances, it's very, very hard to sympathise or to try and see any rational argument as to why society should sympathise with these people. And just a point, it's not a case that everyone from a broken home will end up as a criminal, or everyone who's faced a challenging circumstance in their life. You know, there's people who have come from war zones, who have come from situations where they've been persecuted. They come to this country for a better life, and they are much, much better citizens than some of our domestic thugs. They have got every reason to be bitter at the world. They've got every reason to be feel disenfranchised and marginalised. But in many cases, they try their level best to settle into this country and be good citizens. So I just don't accept the victimhood mentality. I understand, and I'm not ignorant of the fact that some young offenders do come from very unpleasant backgrounds. And I'm not trivialising that. They have suffered in life, and they should be given sympathy for that specific thing. But as soon as they start terrorising society, when social workers and so on lead them to believe that they are victims of society, I take a problem with that. They may be victims of their parents, but does not mean they are victims of society. It's not the same thing. They're victims of abusive parents. To then blame society basically legitimises crime. It says, oh well, it's society's fault, that means what they're doing is okay. No, it's not okay. I mean, this is basically, the way I see it is, people who terrorise society, gangs and so on, are bullies. They aren't victims, they're bullies. And the only way to stand up to a bully is with force. So we need to have a thinking in this country whereby it's not just punishment for the sake of it, but we don't go down the line of trying to make these people believe that they are victims of society. They may be victims of circumstance. That, in my opinion, is not the same as legitimizing them taking it out on society. Because there is absolutely no excuse for what they do, which is putting other people in fear every single day. And you know, if you think it's trivial, try being a small business person who has to make up for their products stolen every single day. You know, try being a small business person facing that sort of pressure. Try being a family. For example, Fiona Pilkington and her daughter, terrorised every single day to the point of being driven to suicide. Try being a family forced from their own home because Yobs put a brick in the window for fun. This is the sort of thing I'm talking about. And I honestly believe, as a society, we should turn around and say, no, we're not going to tolerate this. You do that, you go to jail. And we're not going to feel sorry for you. You're entirely responsible for this. A final point, in the case of young offenders, say below the age of 16, as far as I'm concerned, they should go under a mandatory programme of moral behaviour in society. Laugh at that if you want, it might sound 1950s, but it may well be the only answer. Clearly their parents aren't responsible, so it should be a mandatory programme of making them go through it. But because of we've got so obsessed by certain issues regarding, for example, right to privacy and so on, there's issues, for example, around that. I.e., we still have a situation where young offenders aren't named. Now, I understand the logic that it invades their privacy and gives them a stigma, but the other end of the argument is, if you don't name them, then, you know, the public cannot be vigilant. And I think people have a right to know the people who are terrorising them. Stigmatising them could actually provide a tool for shaming them into change. If you block out their images and so on, then they'll just continue doing what they're doing because they don't see anything wrong with it. But if you make them feel humiliated, make them feel guilty, they might well change. So there's a lot of areas to look at. But I just strongly disagree with the liberal argument of basically give them what they want. That's what it comes down to, because you make excuses for them, you listen to their complaints about society, and then you give in to it. You know, why should they have the upper hand? Why should they be the ones who are listened to, rather than victims of crime, rather than people who are actually being terrorised? Because if you give them what they want, that doesn't actually help them. It just means they'll go on being complacent about the life that they have. So there's a lot of areas to look at with this. I've come to the end of the bandwidth, but it's some thoughts out there. I'm conservative with a small c on crime, and I see nothing that will change my stance on that.